Hey guys, Mustached Tom here to review James Gunn's Superman. Now, obviously I've seen the trailer for this one quite a few times, and I've seen pre-reviews before this movie has even dropped. The unfair advantage of being a small YouTuber and a small reviewer is that I have to wait until after the movie's officially released to actually review it. So, just keep in mind that this will be a spoiler review on top of that. So, this is going to be as objective as possible. Now, I've seen certain reviews already, at least one of them. I've seen a good chunk of the reviews I've seen, at least on the critic side of YouTube. I've seen critics sort of say this movie's okay, but, has its issues, and that means that it's not enough. And I'm here to lend my ideas about what this movie is. So, let's dive into it, shall we? So, for those unfamiliar, we're actually skipping ahead, because in the dialogue we're actually just already getting this narrative that, it's been 30 years since metahumans, as they're referred to as in this universe, have appeared on Earth. This could in fact just be simply referring to Superman himself, as then it kind of moves us along this timeline about how 3 years ago Superman came onto the scene, and then it moves even closer to where we are now 3 minutes ago, saying how he's lost his first battle for the first time. So we're skipping, for those who are somehow unfamiliar with this story, that Superman has come from Krypton, the planet. Now, of course, we get a lot from that later in the movie in terms of, a different interpretation of what the parents, what his parents were like. His original parents, that being. And in that way, we're just jumping into the Superman story. And, you know what? Fair enough. There has been iterations of the Batman story told over and over again. There have been iteration after iteration of the Spider-Man story being told over and over again. And in the latest iteration of, say, for example, in comparison to Spider-Man, we're just skipping the spider bite. In the example of Batman, we are skipping the parents being shown, the flashback of them being killed, and just that being sort of in dialogue in the latter parts of, the Batman remake. So Superman is now following that lead, and I can appreciate that in that, people know the Superman story, and if they don't, then, that material is going to still represent itself in a sense here. So it's not that it's gone necessarily and entirely, it's more so that it's shifted, that we're focusing on what is happening here on planet Earth. So the first opening shot is indeed the thing that I saw in the trailer, which was Superman being plummeted down into the snow, and him whistling for his dog, Krypto. So Krypto comes along and drags him back into the Fortress of Solitude, his base of operations. We see these holograms of his original parents as they turn his base toward the sun so that he can get healed after his injuries. So this is already letting us know that this is a Superman that can get hurt. And that is already a fact that I appreciate. This isn't the overpowered Superman. This isn't the Superman that can just one-shot everything. I like that we're actually, scaling him back. This is only 3 years in the scene. That's not terribly too long to be Superman, all things considered. Though a lot of things have happened within that 3 years, as we'll come to learn, which I also, we'll get to those. So, as he's healed after the fact, he tells Krypto to stay put at the base. So as Superman heads back out, we cut to Lex Luthor, his antagonist. With him already being on the scene 3 years, Lex already has this this already hatred of Superman. And in fact, everything that is happening in this movie is a direct cause from Lex. That is something that, I was watching this one review. I'll just mention who it is. Joe, Angry Joe, for those who aren't familiar. That's the one review I watched so far, before, after watching the movie, that is, of course. And, I've heard other people already say this sort of offhandedly via either Twitter or, in the YouTube thumbnails, that there's too many, side things happening. However, I'm actually going to push back against that. Every side villain, as it were, at least, that we're seeing, is a direct consequence of something Lex is doing. It's all connected to Lex Luthor. Every single piece. That kaiju you see, a direct response from Lex Luthor. That is in the film, in case you miss it. So, the guy who beat up Superman is named Ultraman. He's the one who beat up Superman. So, I will criticize the movie. The movie does jump pretty harshly to its next scene here. That being Kent arriving on to the Daily Planet. There is a harsh sense of this. But I don't think it hurts the movie too much, all things considered. So, he is joined shortly after with Lois and Jimmy Olsen, respectively. And as they're communing about, the stories that are happening on this political war that's sort of happening in the background and between these two countries, or like a country and like the military of another area coming in, Lex begins to explain or narrate to one of his goons, which is a criticism I can expect and will make myself, is that he has made these nanites, which is how he's made this Ultraman like body armor essentially. But we also learned something pretty interesting in this context, is that kryptonite, the thing that typically gets Superman to down and load on his weakness, is actually pretty low. There's not a lot of it, apparently. It's nearly gone, in fact, it seems like. I do appreciate this, and the way they use kryptonite later on, I think it's very effective when it is used, and how it's used, by whom it is used by, even. And we'll get there as well. So anyways, what we learn next is actually probably one of the most interesting shifts in this movie, And that being when we meet back up with their date, at least, what I assumed was their first date, likely not the actually though, is that Lois Lane already knows that Superman is Clark Kent. They are skipping the whole idea that she does not know. 3 years in. So within that 3-year timeline, at one of those years, Superman must have told her. They must have met up before, is what the context we're already getting. We're already jumping in past that point. But what I do appreciate about that is still, they're still early in their relationship in terms of like how they're interacting with each other despite this. That being that Lois tries to interview him as Superman, and they begin to bicker back and forth about his moves towards attacking this Superman attack, or like defense of like this land or whatever, the one that is in the news all the time, all throughout the movie. And it is here where, after the fact, he's given like this message, and he kind of leaves fallen apart by this. Meanwhile, again, showing us how far we're in on this timeline, Lex is able to gain access to the Fortress of Solitude, and we learn how he's able to do that later on in the film. It all, again, sort of correlates, as he has one of his goons, like this lady that has the ability to, like, use those nanites, as I was talking about, to essentially, like, extend them past herself. So they attack the bots that are in the Fortress of Solitude, and they also grab Crypto, who tries to attack them, obviously. And this is where we still see that Lex sees Superman as an it. Not as a person, but as something to be thrown away. And this is the story of Superman and Lex Luthor. It always has been for the longest time. For those, again, unfamiliar, is that Superman is the quintessential immigrant story created by immigrants. Even I know this, and I haven't even read that many Superman comics, if any, but I still know it because I've watched the cartoons growing up, and I've seen the interviews as well. And it is that depiction of, someone else coming into the US, so this movie's very timely. All things, for all the people who pre-criticized the movie before it even came up, because of course that happened, because they took out of context what the director was saying about, this being a movie of being kind, as it were. But it still is, again, death of the author, I still say. Regardless, this still is that story. This still is a political movie. It always has been. That doesn't surprise me. It still is that immigrant story. Lex makes it so. He still sees Superman as this it. He's not a person. He's just someone you can kick out of this country via killing him in this instance. Which, again, is very timely with what has been going on in the real world right now. So obviously, Superman eventually learns of this. But we do... sorry, but I'm getting ahead of myself in the notes. So that kaiju we see, as you may recall from the trailers, Lex Luthor, we see this, contacts some of his lower henchmen to send out. We see the van head out, place a small creature on the town, and the guy says it'll get bigger. We cut to it being bigger. And Superman, I love this scene. You know, some people I've seen Joe say the monster looks weird or whatever, I don't care. I just care about the actions that are happening and the story and the writing. That is my focus on this review. And what's the most important thing here is that Superman stops the kaiju from breaking into one of the buildings that it's about to break into. And Lex and his team are on the scene. They're trying to hopefully that they think that this is going to be the time. Lex has an entire team of like staffers that are all cheering Lex on. They all believe what Lex believes, which is a really interesting connection to because who I've heard Lex has been interpreted as very recently. I find that really interesting. Spoiler alert, it's our current president of the United States. I love it. It's so well done. Because it's never overhanded. It's never too on the nose. That's what I love about this. It can be interpreted as such. And I do see it. So again, we see Superman stopping this creature from hurting more people. He is doing the Superman job to the best of his ability. However, after he's the other heroes arrive, which include the Green Lantern, obviously, Mr. Terrific, and Hawkgirl. Those are the three other heroes that are in this movie. And they arrive on the scene to also attack this monster. And some of their attacks, again, almost lead them to crushing these people because they're still, like, sort of fleeing. And again, Superman scoops underneath to save the people. He puts them first. Because, they're kind of being a little the uniformed squad, as it were, are being a little bit too careless, as it were. And so, Lex gets a hands on the second half of the message that Superman's parents essentially brought up here. And Lex and his main goon she is the first to be surprised, and then Lex is like, I can utilize this, essentially. So he goes on this news station to say, Superman has been grooming us, and he plays the message and it's translated for us, and it pretty much talks about in the second half of this encrypted message about how the parents want him to, like, essentially, take over or, like, rebreed with, like, a harem, essentially. Yes, this is in the movie. And I think this is really interesting. Out of having that distinction between the different types of parents. The parents that cared for him and the parents that were, the real parents, as it were, quote unquote, were actually in this universe, in this reimagined universe, they're the ones that were very much like, you gotta repopulate us. I mean, that's not even gonna be another super villain that we all are aware of, raised on a farm and all that. No, it's actually just gonna start from Superman's parents. This is again a different interpretation of the Superman's original parents, and every other interpretation I've seen of them thus far has been on the supportive side. So I'm actually a little bit open to this flip. It's interesting. It makes the divide way more interesting, and it makes Superman a more interesting character, honestly, to have that divide and to have the comparison to the parents that did raise him proper and true and just in the American way. That comes across so much stronger now that we have this opposing viewpoint from his original parents, as it were. I actually really dig this idea, this context. So we see that again, Superman already knows Mr. Terrific, Green Lantern, and Hawkgirl. They actually all know him too, as well. And I mean that literally. They know him, if you know what I mean. And again, we see Superman doing the saving of the people, the small girl you saw in the trailer. And he does it so often. Anyway. So, after they're done, after Superman is laid into, when the video comes out, Superman rushes to his home, and I mean, his home on the farm in Kansas. And even I thought the video was fake, at least initially, but that never comes to, like, a alternate conclusion, which I actually do appreciate. They never flip the switch on us, being like, no, that's not the real... I actually like that, the director and the writer said, no, we're actually going to take this shift in this dynamic. So Lex is working with this, I think it's called Bulgaria, the country that's like the warring side. They're teaming up essentially to take over this other area that it's far away. You see it in the trailer with the kid holding up the Superman flag. That happens way later in the film, obviously. But Superman returns to his base after the fact, after learning, what has happened. He sees the 4 bots destroyed. He sees that Crypto is gone. So his focus is on Crypto. He is so loyal to his dog. It's so reversed, despite his dog being all a little chaotic, obviously. All throughout the movie, that never changes, and he's still the good dog. Crypto is, obviously. So he smashes into Lex's place looking for Crypto, and obviously this is put on the news, and it's it's shifted to make Superman look even worse. And while that's on the news, we shift over to a cameo from John Cena's Peacemaker, who's on TV, talking about the situation unfolding. Obviously, this is to set up Peacemaker Season 2 or whatever. Who's also made by James Gunn, so that makes sense that he would be here, I guess. So this is the scene I've seen people pre-criticize before the movie came out. This is the scene where Superman returns to Lois, and we see that big jellyfish creature in the background being, like, peppered by as the group is called currently, the Justice Gang. They're not the Justice League yet. Superman says to Lois, they haven't handled. The Green Lantern, Hawkeye, and Terrific haven't handled. I'm way more focused on Crypto, my dog. You know, I actually appreciate this scene as well. I really, really do. It shows he's putting faith in others. It's not just that he's just gonna go out there. He's putting faith in his other, these other guys. This shows again, this really neat aspect to Superman. So Superman purposely wants, in fact, himself to get arrested so that he can try to find Crypto. He believes that this is the best way. And it is within this scene that it's the first time that he's admitting that he loves Lois. They've been dating thus far, obviously. So that is, again, I think cultivating that scene in its entirety. And, you know what? Again, I think it's one of the highlights of the movie. Again, it's telling us a lot about Superman in ways that I don't think a lot of people will get, even though it's taking its time, even though we're seeing this action in the background, as the others are, like, pelting it. You see the Green Lantern bolts, attacking, and so on, and you see other little bips and bops of the creature being attacked from the outside. But again, there is that subcontext of having faith that is never explicit, except for Superman saying they have this. And I think that can go a little bit underhanded in this scene. But I actually greatly appreciate that that's how Superman feels about the other superheroes. He actually does have a level of respect and trust in them, even though they might not even feel the same way. Though that does come around later in the movie with Terrific specifically. But it turns out that Lex does indeed have Crypto, the super dog, and he has him attached to, like, this VR thing where he's, like, chasing super squirrels around, and he's like, oh boy, I gotta get him. Good boy is distracted. And I love that they find ways to keep Crypto in the movie here and later in the movie, but they always, I love this because it's showing that James Gunn isn't forgetting his characters. Crypto is a character in this movie. He's a dog, and he's a good dog. And, he's easily distracted, and he's a little bit rowdy. Those are the things we learn about him in this movie. That's all we need to know for now, I feel. So, Lex's girlfriend, or ex-girlfriend as it'll come soon to be, is named Eve, and she's not liking what she is seeing about the whole Crypto situation. So she's getting in contact and hooking up with being the in for Jimmy to get some of this intel. Meanwhile, Lois is concerned now, considering what Superman has just done, so she goes to meet with the Justice Gang, as it were. She's like, hey, are you gonna help? And they're they've heard the news as well about Superman's heritage being what it was, and then their Green Lantern is definitely the most off on wanting to help Superman after that, learning this information. But we do see Terrific does seem to be willing to hear Lois out still. And here, we have Superman dealt with, I don't recall the guy's name in this movie. His ability is able to manipulate, like, any material that he's come across, I believe is his ability. So Lex tells this creature to pretty much use kryptonite. That's how they get kryptonite into the film. So he's sitting there at kryptonite arm now. So Superman is now obviously losing his powers, the obvious bit. And simultaneously, he has this one guy that cheered Superman on early on in the movie. Again, keeping things tight. Again, for what everyone's saying, I've heard, again, also on Twitter, the pacing is bad. Everything, again, keeps leading back to things that were in the movie. It's like, for this movie that supposedly keeps jumping around, it keeps finding ways to hoop back to the thing that we saw before, bring it back, and make it have an impact. That is fucking impressive, if you ask me. How did he find a way to do that is beyond me, actually. That is some expert filmmaking, if you ask me. Because he gets the guy that we saw approach Superman being like, hey, are you alright? We saw that during the kaiju attack. And he's asking Superman these questions about, like, where are you really from? What are you sitting here to do? And, Superman's barely able to answer, and he's kind of also not wanting to answer these questions, as, this is the scene where you have Lex with the gun, and he's playing Russian roulette with this guy. He's pointing the gun with him. He spins the gun around with the bullet inside, and he shoots it at him once, it misfiring, obviously, the first time. Asking a secondary question, and it already goes off, and this breaks Superman. He is torn just seeing an individual that had this one brief interaction with him die, and that is Superman. That is Superman at his weakest point. On top of that, that is telling us so much about Superman through action through it. I appreciate this as well. That is the level of care that Superman has for the people he saves. It is beyond what I was expecting. He bawls his eyes out crying for this guy. And even the guy in the cell with him, the one that is, the creature, the one that has the kryptonite arms, even he's distraught by this. He didn't, he was expecting this to just be like this questioning aspect and it to not, I guess he was expecting something to come out of Superman or something, I don't know. But this causes that guy to shift his opinion immediately. And he changes his essence to be like an approximation to light, is what he aims to create here. So this is where you see in the trailer that him breaking out of that box thing in the trailer. Superman breaks out, and he also breaks out Krypto. But he quickly gets attacked. And Krypto does as well. So, by the way, all of this is happening in this pocket dimension, which is like, I already know that a certain group of individuals, because they haven't made their review yet, obviously, I'm making my review beforehand, but I'm already putting in my brain cap and thinking, since they've introduced this pocket dimension, they're going to criticize just them having this pocket dimension. So this is all taking place in said pocket dimension. It is like this almost close to black void that has all this weird goop in the bottom. And what I will say is, I actually do like this as in that it still causes more issues than it solves, and that's on the bad guy. That's what I like about this. And they make that very purposeful. This isn't just a location. This is a location that is going to cause an issue because Lex was so desperate to get in on Superman, and we will see this throughout the rest of the movie, what he's willing to do to get the job done from this moment moving forward. Because we do see within this pocket universe is a black hole. And in fact, Superman actually almost gets dragged into it. And so too almost does Crypto, and the other guy is kind of... He has a baby, that's why he wasn't willing to... Which is on this other cell, which is why he wasn't able to... He felt he wasn't able to get out of the situation himself. But Superman saves the baby, the alien baby, as it were, gives it back to him, or like he's like holding it while he's still being attacked by the Lex goons in that nanotech armor. And he's holding the baby above the liquid goo I was talking about, and down the road is the black hole. And they're heading toward it, and you see Superman use his ice breath to push them all far enough away to make it out. And of course, this causes Lex to rage out. And Eve, Lex's quote-unquote ex at this point already, is texting Jimmy. She sends these pictures, and initially he's like, what the heck? Why did she send selfies? And it turns out we will learn that she sent selfies about with like the background being all this intel about what Lex was planning, how he was wanting to create his own country essentially, which sounds awfully familiar to a certain president currently speaking. That is yep. Anyway, they get so he's Superman is at his lowest point after returning from this. He saves the baby and the guy who leaves with the baby, the father. And Terrific and Lois were heading into it, so they're like at the edge of where the portal is, essentially, and then they get saved as well, essentially. Because it's like closing in. So that is temporarily out of the equation, and he goes back to Kansas. Back to his home. Jimmy gives the phone with all the pictures, as I mentioned. It's Lois who immediately puts the pieces together, seeing what's on the backgrounds, as I mentioned, about how... And this is Lex's beginning of the downfall. He opens the portal back up, despite being warned by his crew at this juncture that this black hole is going to cause some serious issues, but he's like, no, we have to stop Superman. This is enough. He's an it. It needs to be destroyed now. We can't let it roam here in America. So we have our somber moment, and you saw it in the trailer, where Pa Kent sits with, Superman. He himself knows about the second half of that message. Superman does, and he feels like, man, that was shit to learn, and everything else that has come of it has been awful as well. And Pa tells him, and one of the most sentimental moments in the movie, among them, is that what you made of the first half of the movie was far more important than the latter half of that video. You still believed, you as an individual still believed that was meant for you to be the kind person that you were meant to be. Superman came to that conclusion. Pa Kent is trying to tell him that you've come to this conclusion by yourself, and us parents are just, we are here to be around to give you the tools to grow up and make your own mistakes, but to rise above that. And it is around that time where, Lex Luthor thinks he's above himself, so he's sending in his squad to take over, to get, to take over that land. Because, again, the military, that the quote-unquote military we're seeing, those are his guys taking over this other area. I forget where it is. But this is where you see that part of the trailer where the kids raise up the Superman flag and people seeing it on the news, and this is where the main theme of Superman begins to kick back in, because of course it is. But unfortunately, Lex has left that rift open. And now, and this is so crucial because it was not it's so poorly ever depicted in other superhero movies. Previous Superman movies included. We see the evacuation. Mwah. Oh, thank God we see the evacuation. We actually see people leaving. Because we see that this tear that has been left by the Lex opening up back the portal, the black hole is making its way, and it's going to cause some serious damage, but we see people are already being evacuated. And now the destruction of the areas that we are seeing, we now, as the audience, know that they are empty. And now, you get that destruction that is seen in Superman movies prior, but now we know for certain as the audience, oh, they evacuated that area, no one's harmed. And of course, things are looking grim. And in fact, two things are happening on different sides of the planet. This rift attack and this military attack, both compounded by Lex. Again, it all drives back to the main antagonist. That is what is so crucial about this movie, and I think that is something I think a lot of other reviewers are going to overlook, honestly. The ones who are criticizing in particular are going to overlook. This all ties back into Lex. Everything is back to Lex. It all goes back to him. It's so important, so crucial. So, Superman, obviously, is not he's been pumped back up, as it were. And we also see, because Lex's office is obviously in Metropolis, where this rift is, taking place, his office breaks apart from the rest of the building, and we see that it is a ship. That is so fucking awesome that we actually also see how Lex deals with the situation. Because he was going to be he like 10 steps ahead, he thinks, at least. And he even says it. He says, brains over bronze. That's how I beat you this time. He already thinks he's won. Over Superman, that is. But Superman comes in. And Terrific joins him in this effort. But they both get attacked by Lex's goons, the one with the nanomachines. Or, sorry, nanomachines, nanotech, whatever. And again, we see on the opposing side, because again, this is happening at the same exact time, is that the military is moving in. We see the kids ready to give up because the military of Lex, as I'll call them here at this juncture, is getting ready to fire on this kid, presumably. And Superman is already being dealt with elsewhere by the goons. So you're like, oh fuck. Is Superman not gonna make it? And granted, this is the one criticism I will again levy, because I'm being as objective as possible. Superman apparently did call the rest of the squad off screen. I do kind of don't like that bit. Because it does. And then we do see the Green Lantern and Hawkgirl land at the war zone at this juncture of the movie, and they're the ones to save, those people from the attack encroaching in further. And here is where we learn another interesting fact, that Ultraman, the one that beat Superman, was a Superman clone. And now the beginning of the movie makes perfect sense. Everyone from the Night's Watch, who was criticizing it, saying, "Oh, Superman's so weak," now it makes sense. This was like beyond chess level play thinking here on this reveal, if you ask me. This was Soji, the Japanese version of chess, where you actually place the chess pieces and then you play after, or whatever. I think that's how chess works in the Japanese version, if I'm not mistaken. This is like that level of thinking. So yeah, obviously they're dealing with, the two of them are dealing with that, and she grabs the guy that Lex is in leagues with on that end. And here's where we just see the distinction between her and Superman. She drops him to his death. I think that's another brilliant move that was criticized, and I'm like, why? That's such a unique aspect to Hawkgirl that distinguishes her from Superman. You have the Green Lantern who's full of himself, and you have Terrific, who's all three of them are different now. They're all set apart by these little actions throughout the movie, and that one moment tells us so much about her. She just outright says, "I'm not him," and just drops him, this guy that was working with Lex, to his death. And again, I think that tells us everything, a lot of what we need to know about Hawkgirl in comparison to even the other two superheroes that are these secondary but still slightly important characters. So yeah, Ultraman is a clone, so he has all the abilities of Superman. So he blinds Superman with the heat vision, or tries to, but Superman whistles for Crypto. Crypto's off, doing whatever, and then hears the whistle from however far away, and Crypto comes in, and throughout this whole movie, Lex has had all of these machines. He's been able to call out these moves that he's numbered and named. This has been context from the very get-go of the Superman movie, excuse me. And now it's coming to its culmination of, now Superman's gonna return the brain over brawn aspect, because, now Lex is trying to use brawn as well. So now Superman's gonna shift to using brain. So he calls Crypto over, and he instructs Crypto to aim at the drones that are recording in Lex, who's, made all these callouts, because he studied Superman within that 3-year gap from the very intro that we were told. And, Crypto has now a function in the final fight, essentially, with Ultraman here. And I love it. It brings everything back. Crypto stays involved. He gets back into the movie. He's not forgotten abruptly for whatever reason. He was just kind of, again, off elsewhere, but he comes back because he was called to by Superman. So that's greatly appreciated. So, they both have their moments. Crypto's going after, he's focusing on the drones because he was told to do so, and Superman's focusing on Ultraman because of course he is. And he gets, like, heated down. He gets bombarded with the nanotech lady's, like, ability to, like, swarm him with, like, the black goo stuff. And he flies all the way up to the sky and then all the way back down to the sewers, removing that from the level of speed that he accumulated going back and forth like that. And he even has to, like, vomit it out. And it's like, ugh. You know, it was potentially able to kill Superman, obviously. So again, that tension, it never leaves. It is consistent. It is pressured upon Superman. Lex is throwing all the marbles at this juncture. He's like, go, 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 go. He's literally losing his mind, too. And, you know, the performance is so fantastic here. And, you know, you see Superman rise back up, but then his reinforcements are called. That is how desperate he is. He has a bunch of these other nanotech guys in these suits. And you see Superman, this is another crucial scene, and I think it's going to be overlooked, again, by a lot of critics. You see it in the trailer, he lasers around, but you see the after thing where it leans in after they get beamed and they're still moving. They're all still alive. Superman does not kill a single one of these guys ever in the movie. That is Superman. He will do so much to make sure this, you know, early readaptation version, that he will make sure that his lasers aren't killing these people, because there are people inside the nanotech machines, obviously. That's what was set up from really early on. And again, I think that's going to be something that is overlooked, unfortunately. So while, you know, Superman's rushing to get to Lex while passing through all these guys, he gets to Lex, Superman does, and Terrific also gets there, and he's tasked with stopping the rift itself. He has the technological know-how, and he was already on Superman's side at this juncture of the movie, so I think that's a perfect place to put him. He has the tech and the know-how to stop the rift. That makes sense, that would be his goal, and Superman is going to deal with Lex. And he's, you know, now confronting Lex, saying how he's human. And again, this final narrative that Superman's saying to Lex Luthor, I am a human. Stop treating me like I'm not. I've made mistakes. So on and so forth. And as Terrific stops the rift, and as, you know, Superman is done lecturing Lex, it is boop, because Lois and her team have collected all the information, and they just published at this very same juncture how Lex was involved in this whole bombardment of, you know, wanting to take over that land, and it's on the news now. And I love this bit because I know it's gonna infuriate critics who are political, who bring up politics, because there's a guy on the news who brings up literally both aisles of party. He literally says it. We both hate Lex. Fuck yes. I can't wait to see it. I know it's going to happen. I have not seen the reviews yet, but I am betting that it will happen. Guaranteed. Because of course they're gonna hate that little line. But it makes so much sense. Lex literally portaled this black hole to us. You know, again, who that represents, what that black hole is representing in real life right now. I'm just saying, you know, well, timely is a word I would use again. So, you know, just gotta let that one sit where it may at this juncture. So Superman, done and dusted with his journey, goes back to Lois, and Lois says, or he says, I'll have that interview with you, Lois. And she returns with her inside the building, and they kiss each other. And the guy who runs the planet, what's his name? Perry? Am I misremembering that, or am I thinking of the other guy? Anyway, he's like, oh, they're totally seeing each other, aren't they? He kind of puts that together at this juncture of the end of the movie. And it is here that she returns the I love you from earlier in their intimate moment. And, you know, this is where the scene, or the movie ends, quote unquote. But not actually. We get our after credit sequence here, before the credits. Which, I'm actually gonna say this. I actually prefer this. I am so done of having the credits start up and then having the scene cut in. Just have the scene after the movie quote-unquote ends. Why not? That makes... Set up your movie within your movie, not like cut away to credits and then cut back to a scene. That just... It just feels... It has always felt weird to me. It's like, just set up your next movie if you're going to, and they do. So it is here we're introduced to Supergirl. And we learn here, Crypto was hers, apparently, which makes a lot of that, how Crypto behaves, as he puts it, Superman himself puts it, make a whole lot more sense. And as he's sort of, you know, finally relaxing, finally having a moment to just relax and heal after all that intenseness, he decides to have a seat and look around. He's being rotated around, and he's seeing all these little clips of him growing up on the farm. And that is Superman. And outside of, like, him calling his squad off screen, and, like, the earlier bit I slightly criticized the movie for, I think this is easily the tightest Superman movie I think I've seen. Tightest. Tight. Every action, everything we see is a direct result of the antagonist, villain, Lex Luthor. It all comes back to him. And, you know, his willingness to keep pursuing Superman, the kaiju, a result of Lex Luthor, the nano guys are a direct result of Superman, him going to the Fortress of Solitude, getting the intel about what the parents thought, that was all Lex Luthor. Everything just ties back to Lex. It's all him. The narrative, despite being paced so quickly, it's surprisingly tight. This is what I was saying about Hazbin Hotel. You know, people, 8 episodes, for those who don't remember my review of it, I was saying how, you know, people were criticizing that for the very same thing. The series is too fast-paced. But the story kept very unhoned with its, you know, main plot, as it were, in that context. From what I recall about, you know, getting to heaven and all that, it always came back to that at the end of the day. And I feel even stronger about this context of Superman. It always came back to Lex, as every threat did to Superman. It all came back to him. The Ultraman, the kaiju, again, everything. Just all back to him, despite the weird tooth bit that happens at the near end mark of Superman punching that one guy. I think you could have cut that. That was, yeah, I will admit that's a minor detail, like so minor, in fact. And I know people are probably gonna, certain reviewer critics are gonna harp on it. It's like, that's like, yeah, I get it, you can cut it out, but that's like 2 seconds, or 3 seconds, 3 to 5 seconds. I don't even know how short it is that you would only need to cut. But, yeah. I think outside of those small actual criticisms about him just calling his team off screen, I think this movie is the tightest Superman narrative there existed. Period. I mean, it is so well constructed, surprisingly. After all the criticism I've heard so far, how it's terrible with no context, or how it's horrible with no context, and even after hearing the context, I'm like, did we watch the same movie almost? Am I missing something of why people are criticizing this movie? What piece isn't being fulfilled here? It's hopeful, it's, you know, and we start from the slow point, and we're building up things, you know, this pace that is so quick, quote unquote, is building up. And these attacks on Lex are becoming more and more ludicrous. The kaiju in itself particular, extremely ludicrous. That imp creature, probably not even Lex, but who knows, right? I mean, that might be the only exception, except, you know, that's the one scene that Superman doesn't even feel. He says it himself, again, having faith in his other team that aren't even on his team officially. But again, him having that faith in others is what he inspires to want. And that is Superman. That is Superman. That is his greatest scene, dare I say. Like, that is so Superman. That is quintessential Superman. How is it not? That's the question I want to ask every critic. How is that not Superman? So, this is easily a 9 out of 10. Like, if they just gave these little fixes here and there of, like, we see the call of Superman bringing in the other two, because I do think that is a very important aspect of, you know, making sure we as the audience know that they're going to come in and be the other, you know, junctioning part of this movie. Even if it's not Superman directly, maybe he contacted Lois, we see that, and we see Lois contacting the Justice Gang, as they're referred to in this movie. Again, something small like that, I feel could have easily gotten that across really quickly. But, you know, if that were fulfilled, this is easily a 10 out of 10 for me. This is so tight of a script. So tight of just action having you know, and a lot of the dialogue is still direct on top of that. So I'm gonna have a field day trying to figure out why people are gonna misinterpret what the fuck this movie is about. You know, outside of, like, again, this pacing issue, which I actually don't understand. This movie builds up surprisingly so well. Because, again, they keep attaching the majority of the things that are happening outside the squid thing, I guess. Like, that's, as far as I know, that is the only exception to the movie that is kind of made clear, I guess. Like, that might be the only exception in the entire movie. And with the rest of it hinging on every action Lex is taking to stop Superman, I would say the pacing of the movie, despite being quick, is consistent. That is what's crucial here. That is what writing is all about. Regardless of what pacing you have, as long as you can keep consistent, stay on message, what this movie consistently does, because every action is telling me this is Superman. Every action, saving the people, saving the little animals, you know, always scooping in after the other heroes kind of almost screw up in that kaiju fight. That is Superman. but Superman also still having enough faith in them, despite that, tells us even more about Superman. Clark Kent, who are one and the same, obviously. We already know this to be true. And again, the flip of the narrative of the original parents, I feel, is again a really interesting way of having this new dilemma that I don't think I've seen this version of it before. Again, I don't follow the Superman comics that strongly, but still, just watching the movie as it is, it still comes across to me this interesting dynamic. It's so interesting that the parents would instead be like, hey, we are going, we need you to continue our lifeline. If this message truly is true, which seems to be the implication of the end of the movie, because that never flips, as I mentioned before, and having that juxtaposed to the parents that raised him, that tells me that Pa and Ma Kent are his parents. They're not his biological family, but they're his parents. He might not be your father, or I forget, what is the line from Guardians of the Galaxy? I forget how the flip is. He might not be your father, but he might be your pa, or like something like that. I forget what it is in Guardians of the Galaxy, but it reminds me of that line from Guardians, who, directed by James Gunn. So that theme carries over. These might not have been your biological parents, but they are your parents. And that tells us everything we need to know. He might have been adopted as this baby. He might have, he is still seen as this illegal alien immigrant. And I'm just throwing in the word immigrant because that part is kind of just intrinsic to the Superman story. He came from Krypton, this otherworldly planet. He was literally driven off to planet Earth, and then was accumulated by the Kents. And then Superman came to be, and that's what Lex hated. He hated this alien. This other. He hated all of it. But it was him. He was a man who could feel pain, who could make mistakes, and that's Superman. This is a 9 out of 10. Easily. I don't understand where the criticisms are coming from. I've seen Joe's, I will see others, but I don't get the criticisms. This, I'm gonna say it, I think this is the best Superman, live action Superman, if that has to be separated from animation for whatever reason, but this is the best version of Superman, easily. This dog piles over the Man of Steel that was, put together some time ago with, Pa Kent being like, no, in the tornado. Oh my god. Everyone criticized that scene. There is nobody I know that says that moment was good in the critic space. Everyone has mocked that scene to death. But here, that never happens. There's never a moment where I'm like, that was just silly or stupid or whatever. And hell, they even explain the context of why people fall for Superman's glasses and all that. The hypno glasses, as explained by the Green Lantern in this context to Lois Lane. So we even understand why that works in this context. So James Gunn even accounted for that like so much level of care in that detail is so fascinating to me, and how that's probably gonna also get overlooked by the number of other critics that I will definitely want to see now that I've made my review officially. Anyway, this is easily a 9 out of 10. If you have not seen this version of Superman, I highly recommend it. I don't know. I don't know what else to say to convince you if you've not else been convinced. But that is my review of James Gunn's Superman. And I hope that this is the quintessential success, because, you know, I think this is a fantastic start to the reboot of the DCEU. So that's my review. If you ended up enjoying it, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. 100 to my petition about smaller YouTubers. Second to my PayPal, where you can help support me and my channel locally. And third to my Discord, so you can join, collab, share, do all that cool stuff. And until next time, everyone, bye!